Afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the afternoon session where we are going to have a discussion on getting safely to the bus. And Gina Potter will be our host for this session. Gina Potter, you can introduce yourself and your speakers for this session. Welcome.
Thank you very much. So Fatima and I are hosting this session. And we're hoping that connectivity will stay. But so welcome to everybody. Here, if I just go along my screen, which is probably arranged differently from yours, I've got Regina from University of Cape Coast in Ghana, Emma Murphy, who's from Durham in UK with me, Fatima, who's come in from from Maputo University, Usmanu Danfodiyo University, Daniel Oviedo, who's here from UCL, Gadi Ambrosini, who's from Transaid, and those are our presenters. I think we should have Wilma Maputo and Khan joining us too, but maybe they will come later. So I think we need to get started because we've only got a limited amount of time. So I'll try to share my screen and just start things off, and then other people will come in at various points. So, it's not letting me. Can you see this screen? Can you?
Not yet.
Not yet. Have you got it now?
I've started.
You've got it. Great. Okay, thank you very much. So this session is about women getting transport and getting home after they've got off transport.
Gina, maybe put the presentation in presentation mode.
Yes. Here we go. There we are. Is that okay?
Yes.
You got it. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So it's what we're going to do is just start with some short presentations from our work that we're doing in Tunis, Cape Town, and Abuja, which is there's a lot of interference. I don't know if that's maybe somebody needs to mute, perhaps. So we're going to start with that because it's the sort of issues that came out of our work that made us suggest this session to ANWAC, and we're very grateful for the opportunity to have this meeting discussion. We'll then have hopefully some recorded experiences from a couple of our community peer researchers, but then we want to move on to the observations of researchers who are working elsewhere. So we've got Wilma and Chito from Lusaka, hopefully. We've got Clemence Kabole from Maputo. We've got Daniel Oviedo for Freetown, and we've got Regina for, and I'll get her name wrong, so I won't say it. She'll tell you herself, from Cape Coast. And what we'd like to do then is, when we've had all these short presentations, to come to the audience and ask you about your experiences of walking insecurities. And from that, then move to Shadi Ambrosini, who's going to just try to reflect from his work in Transaid about what potential interventions there might be to improving safety for women on these journeys to and from the bus or whatever the transport is. And finally, maybe we can put together some thoughts towards a draft action plan. So just very briefly, a little bit about our study. We're working in these three cities, Tunis, Cape Town, and Abuja. It's a multidisciplinary study. And it's very much about helping disadvantaged young women living in the urban peripheries to improve how they travel, in order actually with a further objective of trying to improve their employment opportunities, whether where they might get to work, and even possibly whether they might work in the transport sector. And it's very much a collaborative approach. So we've got various universities: University of Cape Town, Usmanu Danfodiyo University, there's Jos University involved, and so on. But also we trained peer researchers at the start of the project in our 3 study cities, and they have been key to the way we've worked in trying to understand what's happening in their communities. And we've also got country consultative groups where we're trying to get everybody, including our peer researchers, back to talk with people in government, with NGOs and so on about the issues, and try to move forward with some useful action. And there's the website. So if I move forward then. So we're going to go first to Tunis, and Emma's going to talk now, and then on to the other cities. Thanks, Emma.
Hi, everyone. I wish I was in Tunis right now. Wouldn't that be nice? I'm sure these will be all too familiar to everyone. The 2 single biggest issues or things that shape the experience of the young women in our study getting to and from the bus and other public transport stations and locations was safety or lack of safety and poor infrastructure. I think, can someone turn off there? That's it, thank you. On the safety issue, there were 3 dimensions to the lack of safety. The first one is simply that the road system in Tunis is extremely unsafe. The poor road infrastructure, the poor standards of vehicle safety, poor standards of driving, the very competitive, because the roads are very overcrowded. The driving is very competitive and quite aggressive, and there is a very high rate of road traffic accidents, which includes pedestrians being hit by vehicles on the roads. So generally, the young women we talk to, sorry, there's a lot of interference. Hey, can I just check everyone's turned on to mute, please, if possible? Generally, the young women we talked to were very conscious that just walking along the side of the road where there are very few pavements was actually quite a hazardous thing to be doing. The second aspect of this, and probably the single biggest issue that women face when they're walking on the streets in Tunis, is sexual harassment and gender-based violence. And this is very definitely got progressively worse in the last few years as the police presence has either become less visible, or indeed the police have a lower status post uprising in 2011. Standards, the women, it's partly to do with the competition to get access to transport, but it's also just walking along the road, the norms that make it all right to catcall to women, to touch women, unwanted touching, to expose men exposing themselves, you name it. And it's the girls we were talking to were saying every time you leave the house, it's a 50-50 chance that you're going to get harassed in some way. And it is probably the single biggest defining character of being out in public areas and trying to get to, or indeed travel on transport. And we had a lot of discussion about how women subsequently dress, whether they dress to be invisible, whether they dress to send signals that they're more conservative. A lot of women saying that didn't make any difference, that it didn't really make any difference how you dressed, you would still get harassed. But it had a very significant impact on women that they dressed for traveling, they dressed for leaving the house, not because they were dressing up to go and have a nice time, but they were dressing to try and avoid harassment, gender-based harassment and unwanted attention. And that was very significant for a lot of them. And then the third aspect was mugging and petty crime. That again, it was a 50-50 chance that there would be some kind of mugging or petty crime around you as you were out on the roads or on transport. Lots of no-go areas, especially around transport stations and the poorer neighbourhoods where there was very little street lighting and no police presence or no presence to try and protect you, no CCTVs, of course. Lots of attacks on the buses, being held up at knife point, lots of grabbing of handbags, mobile phones. And again, girls would not wear jewelry out in public. They would have one mobile phone in their handbag that they actually used, and then one that they held in their hands that they didn't use, hoping that that one would get taken. So really an awareness about the lack of personal safety from all these different dimensions. The second aspect was the poor infrastructure. There's been, in the last 20 years, a very significant lack of investment in transport infrastructure, but also just generally in the public space. So lack of pavements, which means because there's a lack of proper designated parking space and too many cars on the roads. Cars would just pull up on the pavements willy-nilly. It was very hard to maneuver around them or around designated walking areas. They were full of rubbish. People would just dump things on the pavement. So it was very hard to actually maneuver your way in safety along the side of roads. As I said, lack of street lighting or any kind of CCTV, particularly in the poorer areas. The roads themselves are in very poor condition. They're full of holes. Some areas are full of mud and puddles to the point where the girl said even the taxis won't go there. So if you're coming back or going to work and you have to go through a poor neighborhood, the taxis won't take you. You have to walk through, even if there's no lighting, even if you know it's not safe and you're likely to get mugged. Crowded, poorly maintained bus stations where men are jostling to try and get onto the buses or into the collective taxis. And it's quite hard for women who don't have the same physicality to compete for places. And so they feel pushed out of those spaces and feel unsafe in those spaces. And no provision of any kind for disabled travellers or women with children or strollers or elderly women who need designated seating spaces to try and rest between walking, or just need to feel safe and protected. So I think, I'm sure these are very familiar to all of you. We have here some of the comments that our peer researchers collected from the young women that they interviewed as they were moving around the city themselves. And I'm sure these will be quite familiar stories to many of you. Is that all right, Gina? I hope I've kept time.
Thanks, Emma. I think everybody will have been able to read those comments. You get a good idea of the sort of issues. So I'll just go on. There was one. Whoops. Oh, there we are. Yes, I don't know if you wanted to say anything about the picture, Emma.
Well, we can't really see the pavements here. But then that in itself, you can see that the woman is having to walk between the traffic, and you can see that there are cars just pulling up on the side. You can also see the housing infrastructure is quite dilapidated in Tunis. In all the investment in public infrastructure and in housing is really going to the new suburbs for the wealthier middle and upper classes. So particularly downtown and in the poorer areas, a lot of the housing on the side of the road is actually very unsafe and bits fall off it. It sounds a bit bizarre, but particularly the old colonial architecture right in the center of the town, quite often the plaster work and the stonework just literally falls off as you're walking along the side of the road. And people have been killed by falling balconies, but you can also see it's quite haphazard. It's very unregulated or poorly regulated. And so it's not really a very safe environment just to be walking in before you even think about some of the hazards that I described to you.
Thanks, Emma. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about Cape Town, because sadly Ariane de Lannoy, who leads the Cape Town study isn't available. But essentially, safety is the big issue, the biggest issue in the study in our study neighbourhoods. There's the potential for accidents because you've got drivers zooming through the streets. You've got violence on the streets, gangs. There is robbery, potential for rape, even kidnap. And then after dark, if you walk, you try to find somebody to walk with, ideally a couple of people. Or if you haven't got anyone, you try to attach yourself at the end of a group so that you don't seem to be on your own. And these sort of tactics are really crucial, young women say, as they move around trying to get home, particularly after dark, or traveling early in the morning to get a bus to go to work. And the big issue linked to this, of course, is that if you need to get to work, you've got to get there on time. But very likely you're going to be waiting for a minibus taxi and it's got to fill up before the taxi leaves. So how do you time things to make sure you've got enough time to get to the taxi station, but that you won't be hanging around and become a potential target for thieves or whatever? So it's very stressful for young women when they're doing these journeys from home, particularly in the early morning, to work. And again, some voices from the peer researchers study, the sort of stories they heard. Sometimes you go to school, you're scared to go to school because you've got to go on the highway. You've got gangs with guns. And sometimes you'll just miss school because of that. Young women then below talking about, even during the day to walk alone, it's not safe. There are particular places that are especially dangerous. There's a dangerous bridge and the minibus taxis won't go to that side in the mornings. So you've got to get somebody to accompany you. In this case, it's a boyfriend. Another woman saying her husband has to go with her. It's a 20-minute walk to the taxi, but she's worried she hasn't got to be late because otherwise she'll lose her job. She's worried that that her husband, who's gone with her to get to the taxi, he's also got to get home, and he's got back home, and he's got to stay safe. So there is a big problems for women, but it's not just women. It's also, you've got to bear in mind that men can be vulnerable sometimes too. And you see the sort of situation. This was actually during one of the big taxi disputes on the left-hand side, and you can see everybody sort of scrunched up at the pavement, not enough space. It's very easy to get jostled off as you're walking. And then the young woman waiting to cross a road in one of the neighbourhoods where we're working, and it's quite tricky. You feel nervous, vulnerable. And then a photo of some work we did earlier, a schoolgirl explaining to somebody how she nearly got raped on this particular track out from one of the neighbourhoods. So then Fatima is going to talk about Abuja. Fatima?
Yeah. Thank you very much. Good, is it morning, even everybody there? Yeah, thank you very much. Here in Abuja, as narrated by my colleagues, here in Abuja, we have similar experience. And importantly, maybe many of the taxis and the buses, because of bad roads, so they don't get to they only fly the highways. So for commuters, they need to either walk to the highway, depending on the distance, or take an Okada. Is it border, the motorcycle or tricycle to come to the highway. So, and sometimes, so in the two areas we study, and that is the situation. So getting the taxi, you need to take another, come to that. And that is where they face the biggest challenge. And it's the same thing like in the other part of Africa is the issue of safety and security, and is the issue of infrastructure. So young women working to go to work or to go to the market, they face a lot of security challenges for them to be able to catch the bus or to take the taxi. And there are so many spaces along the walking distance where it is not safe for them to cross. There is the issue of theft, the issue of rape, the issue of kidnapping. Now that is the new insecurity issue in northern Nigeria about bandits. We call them bandits, kidnapping young women, and even now it is everybody, including the men, for ransom. So they kidnap, and so there is that working to go to the bus. There is that issue of insecurity. Another thing that became very clear was also that insecurity is affecting the lack of access to the taxis and buses. It's also affecting the economic activities of the women. So as women, and this is a gender issue, as women, they find it difficult to transport their goods. Either they are taking it to the market for sale, or they have bought them, they want to sell the goods in front of their families, in front of their homes. So they encounter the challenges of having to do that. And I can give you one I want to read this quote, is that, yes, like this forest, and that's the road, the linking road, women should not pass there at night. There have been cases of rape. A woman should not be found there at night. The area is also known for kidnapping cases, and they've collected that fund. And there was a young girl who said she was even raped, and we have seen cases of rape. So it's really such a big challenge for many of them. So it's not only working, but also many of them said their businesses is affected. A woman who sells charcoal said she found it difficult even to transport her good to the house where she will sell. And so the issue is not only the insecurity, but also is affecting the economic well-being of our women in Abuja, and especially in those semi-urban periphery areas where there are no buses or no taxi. They have to walk around or use the motorcycle and tricycle that is not safe. Another issue I want to raise is also the issue of the load. And as I've said, in fact, even the Okada, and that's the motorcycle, they don't like taking women, because many women said because they see women coming with loads, the women will carry babies, they will carry load on the head, and that will add weight to the motorcycle. So sometimes it's safer for them to take it. And Gina, can you show me the picture for me to show that? So it's such. So the women, therefore, some of them therefore prefer to carry their loads along the way in order for them to run away from this. So women as commuters, they are really not even the Okadas. They don't want to take them because they come with extra load. And this is actually the load on the firewood on the that's also a cultural issue, and this is another group of people that carry them. But this is one big issue that that women talk about. And I also, so you can see the right hand side, the down right hand side picture It's also, and this is Okada. You can see how it's one of the communities very saturated with motorcycles, with the tricycle, running to go and taxi a taxi or to take a bus. And that is how it is. And in most cases, they pass through the bushy area for them to be able to get to the bus. And it's really very congested. Another issue they raise about safety is the issue that most of these motorcyclists and tricycle, they always drive under the influence of drugs. There are school leavers, unemployed school leavers who found employment using the tricycle, the motorcycle, and they are under the influence of drugs. So they drive roughly. And even the government is finding it difficult to contain, to restrain them. The option government took was really to ban them. And then, but then there was a time when we were doing the research, the government banned the usage of them. The government had to allow them to come back because there's just no alternative linking the road and those hinterland. So the government had to bring them. So they talk sometimes they will take a motorcycle and then the driver is smelling of drugs and they only pray. That's the only thing they can do. And really that is so far our experience in Abuja, considering the infrastructures decay as well as the insecurity that they encounter in commuting to take a bus or to take a taxi. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Fatima. We're going to try, well, Emma's going to try and see if we can get a couple of short videos to run. But if it doesn't work, we will move on.
Gina, I'm not sure whether you need to stop sharing a screen in a.
Maybe I do. Mine. Yeah, sorry. Indeed. Yeah, there we go.
Oh, okay, everyone, please bear with me for a second. Are you seeing this, Gina?
Not yet.
You're not seeing anything at the moment.
No. Oh. Just the
okay
standard screen.
Okay, so I'm going to try and share.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
I think
okay.
No, we've got. Yep.
Okay. Here we go. Okay.
Mm. Do you have to play?
Okay, are you not seeing it?
No.
Oh, sorry. I can actually see it. Sorry, so I thought you were.
No.
Okay, I think it's probably not going to work then. If you can't see what I'm seeing, then it probably isn't going to work, Gina. I'm sorry.
Okay, we'll leave it at that. If you can stop sharing, and then I'll try and share again.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah. Oh. Sorry, I'll just have to go through and then move back. Okay, so we would have liked to have, we had some nice snips from videos from Abuja and from Tunis with our peer researchers doing these journeys and talking about them. And I'm sorry we can't show you those because the peer researchers put quite a lot of effort into doing it. But anyway, moving on. Oh, this is just briefly, this is our website if you want to look at our study, and you'll see all the contributing researchers and so on. But now we're going to go to some experiences from other locations, starting with Wilma from Lusaka. Are you there, Wilma?
Yes, I'm here, Gina.
Thank you. So do you want, you're going to just talk, or you didn't have a slide to share, did you?
No,
Yeah, good.
no. I'll just talk.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So yes, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for the two presentations. I tuned in when there was a presentation from Tunis by Emma, and I listened in to the Abuja presentation by Fatima. It's amazing, the similarities. It's like everyone in the world decides to act the same towards women. On the streets in Lusaka, which I'm conversant with, there tends to be sexual harassment, especially depending on how a young lady is dressed. There's been instances of young ladies being undressed in public because the men around feel she's not dressed appropriately. And this, of course, makes it unsafe for others. And in the past few years, we also had politically linked insecurity. If you wear the attire of the opposition as a woman, even as a man on the streets, you were at risk of being attacked. But at least that has gone down now with a change of government. And I would think, for us in Lusaka, the daytime security is not as bad for women. Of course, there are those areas in certain unplanned settlements where there's general insecurity for everybody, even during the day, where even a woman wouldn't be safe and a man wouldn't be safe. But on the streets, I think a woman stands a chance of being mugged or being pickpocketed as much as a man. So the daytime is not too bad. It's at night when, of course, it's not safe. And for the same reasons that have been given, the streets are not lit, most of them. And that's the time when you find a lot of characters on the streets trying to take a chance to steal and to rob people. And women are, of course, the easier targets. We did have a few years back, of late I haven't heard many instances of street kids. Some of them are now not kids anymore, they're probably teenagers, but they would band up, since there are lots of them. Like if you're a woman, an adult woman, and you're attacked by 15, 20 kids, you don't stand a chance. And I think there was even one case where a lady was raped by the street kids. So that's the level of insecurity where even street kids can cause insecurity to women on the road. And in terms of, I liked what Fatima said. She linked insecurity and the street to causing hindrances to business. Women need to get on the buses to go to the market to bring their goods. So even their goods are not safe. Sometimes their goods, we have wheelbarrow men who move around. If a woman buys a lot of goods to sell, some of them have been known to run off with the ladies' wares. She can't keep up, they're not regulated. So she has no way of tracing this guy, and they just run off with all her market goods. And as well as sometimes on the bus, they just load your vegetables in any odd way. You have no say. It's either you take the bus or you walk. You get to your destination as a woman, they just throw them off the bus. And these are vegetables. You need them to be fresh so that you can sell and get the optimum price. And you see this happening on the streets, and it affects the women's business. And one aspect, I don't know whether the researchers have looked at, it always crosses my mind, and that is road safety awareness. Because sometimes pedestrians as well are not, they don't follow the rules. Of course, the drivers aren't following the rules, but how well do pedestrians follow the rules to keep themselves safe? Even crossing the road, they don't know which way to look first. They don't even look, some of them, they just cross. And I feel that's one aspect we need to increase. I remember when I was in primary school, we used to sing a song, and it reminds you where to look first. But I doubt, because you find people, there's a zebra crossing, but how are you're walking as if you're on a catwalk. You know, at least you need to walk a bit briskly. Yes, it's on the main street, and you've been given way. So all those aspects of security as well, I think awareness needs to be raised for pedestrians as well as drivers, but pedestrians also have a role to play. And I think it's an aspect that has been neglected. And it's just amazing that for Zambia, I think almost 51% of the population is made of women, and that's the urban population as well. And this means like half of the population does not feel they have that freedom to go where they want to go, when they want to go. As a woman, you can't wake up or get out of your house when it's 20 hours, 8 o'clock, 8 p.m., and just take off. Why should it be like that? Okay. Why should it be that you always need an escort? And I think what are cities in Africa going to do about their, and it seems that the insecurity is getting higher. It's increasing. You hear of kidnappings. I mean, being kidnapped when you're going to work. Where else are you supposed to be in the morning if not going to work, or coming from work in the evening? So I think this is one aspect that the cities need to look into, because this is women are a productive part of the economy. They contribute so much, and if they feel, I'm sure some feel they can't start certain businesses because it's not safe, maybe trading by the roadside. If your clients are going to be buying your goods up to 20 hours, but you can't stay that long on the street because it's not safe for you. So there should be a deliberate effort to make streets safe. I don't know how much time I have left, but I think one last thing is also, when women are using public transport, in Zambia, we have the conductors who collect the money. You find stories of, when it's a woman, if you give them a big note, they'll keep on delaying until you get to your station, and then they'll just say, I don't have change, and the bus drives off. And you don't get your change, and it happens mostly to women, and that's daylight robbery. And so all these add up to making women's mobility, it's uncomfortable, you make losses, you are at risk every day as you are on the street. And like I said, I mean, in Zambia, it's not daytime. Even, I mean, I don't know whether the cases of nighttime insecurity are low, because women just have just decided not to move. It's very difficult to tell whether the cases are not high, because maybe women just make sure they give themselves a curfew. So I think it's something that also needs to be looked at. Is it because women are not in those places why things are not happening to them? Because they've just decided to limit their mobility and to maybe always make sure they're in the company of others, which is not always possible. So yes, I'm talking about the infrastructure itself. Dilapidated infrastructure has its advantages and disadvantages, as well as new infrastructure. We have a situation where we have new roads, new flyovers, and the speed that people move at is alarming. So how does a woman cross the road, an older woman? Someone talked about the handicapped. So when a new road is being created, or when a road is being expanded from 2 lanes to 4 lanes, how are people supposed to cross that road? I think for women, older women, handicapped, it's not just about the infrastructure, but the users and the people who need to cross over to use that road. And like I said, bad roads are an advantage if you're selling by the road, because people slow down, you can sell your oranges, you can sell your bananas. And we've seen in Lusaka women lose out because now the road has been improved. No one is stopping anymore at the corner because the road is now it has a slip lane. So your former customers don't stop anymore, and women are losing out, and no one is taking note of where they are going. What alternative trading places are these women finding? So that's what I would have to contribute. I think this is a very interesting and important topic because, as I've said, women make up almost half of the population in most of our countries. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Wilma. That's great. And you've introduced some other issues that we need to think about and brought us back to some things like kidnap, which is it's interesting how that's emerged as a major issue in so many places. So if we move then to Clemence and Maputo, please. Whoops. Sorry. I think have we lost Clemence?
Maybe. Okay. It's working now. Sorry,
good.
The system didn't let me unmute myself, but that's working now. Thanks, Gina, for organizing this session. Thank you, everybody, for your contribution. So it's, as Wilma said, it's striking the similarities between the different cities. So the issues I'm going to highlight now, focusing on Maputo, draw on the project TSUM, that stands for Transitions to Sustainable Urban Mobility in Sub-Saharan African Cities. And this project interrogates the extent to which cities such as Maputo can accelerate a transition towards increased sustainability and equity, in particular linked with mobility, accessibility, and land use. And although gender-based issues were not at the core of our research, relevant findings have emerged in the context of the study, and I will briefly highlight some of them now. So the findings I'll be sharing draw on the work that one of our MSc Transport students, Mohamed Dahir, did in the context of a dissertation as part of TSUM. And I think Mohamed is with us in the audience, and I'm sure he can help answer any specific questions. And I'm also drawing on a paper written by Susanna Masingwe and my colleague Daniel Oviedo from UCL, who will be speaking about Freetown shortly. So in order to address the data gap related to gender issues and transport in Maputo, we run 4 focus groups in 4 different neighborhoods with different socio-economic. 15 participants were interviewed on average in each neighborhood, and we ask questions related to behavior and practices, rationales and motivations, and expectations and suggestions related to policy and practice. We wanted to understand the perspectives of different communities at different stages of motorization in Maputo and in the Maputo metropolitan area. So relevant finding, and I'm gonna share my screen if you allow me to. So relevant findings indicate that female participants, in particular those based in neighborhoods close to the city center, have 2 main modes of transport. One, a combination between walking and taking a minibus, or 2, walking directly to their destination. Whereas men, on the other hand, tended to use a wider range of transport modes. So that was one of the interesting findings that came up. And another point to mention here is that on average, like in most other countries that we're focusing on, unemployment and poverty tend to affect women more than men, and they can lead to immobility. And even though it's not strictly related to the topic of this conversation, we thought it was an interesting point. And by immobility, we meant women not leaving their house much or not leaving their neighborhood. Whereas on average, the men of them frequently in the neighborhood. So it sounds like women tend to be more locally bound in terms of their mobility. And one of the reasons frequently mentioned by interviewees to explain the situation was the fear of leaving their property unattended. So in Molase, a neighborhood in the semi-urban area at the outskirts of the city, a participant mentioned that leaving the house and women to walk as they cannot always afford motorized transport. Another issue that participants highlighted is that the women involved in street trading, and most street traders are women in Maputo, experience difficulty in using collective transport when they carry loads, and that was mentioned in the context of other cities too. So for example, a female participant in Chamanculo, a neighborhood close to the city center, mentioned, "We come back by foot because chaiperos, the minibus drivers, do not accept the load that we have." Another issue, which obviously is so common in many, sadly so common in many places, are issues related to crime, which were frequently mentioned by women in the 4 different neighborhoods we looked at. And interestingly, in the context of Maputo, some participants also mentioned that they need to have mechanisms in place, for instance, being accompanied by other people when returning from their main activity, in particular during the evening when they are walking back home. So one woman from Chamanculo, for instance, said, "I come back from the baraka at night, but I can't go back alone. I have to pay kids to accompany me." So fear of crime most definitely reduces women's temporal window to travel. Women avoid walking at night. And the last point I will mention, which is also common in many other cities, is that the walkability issues were frequently mentioned by participants across genders, not specifically female participants. So the participants from the low-income neighborhoods seem to be most affected by walkability issues, and concerns linked with poor walkability infrastructure were mentioned. For example, people often have to jump over potholes, and the occupation of the pavement by parked cars, which is ubiquitous in particular in the city center of Maputo, was often mentioned as an issue for pedestrians. So the most disadvantaged in the most disadvantaged communities, women often emerge as the most vulnerable and disadvantaged due to all the issues mentioned, but also the additional safety and security risks that they face. I wasn't able to share my screen, unfortunately, but I think that gives you a good overview of some of the issues that have emerged in the context of our study in Maputo.
Yeah, thanks very much, Clemence. Yeah, again, and it's helping to build a really rich picture, I think, as we move forward across these different cities. And so if we go on then to Regina to talk about Cape Coast, which is a smaller city. So be interesting to see how that might be similar or different from the others. Thanks, Regina.
Thank you very much, Gina, and thanks everybody for your presentation. It's been very lovely, and It is quite refreshing how the issues actually cut across, irrespective of the cities involved. Here in Ghana, actually, we've not done a study that focuses strictly on the journey to the terminals or away from the terminals. However, I will borrow from a lot of studies that has been done, which I have been part of, which looked at other aspects, but then also brought in this issue of safety for school children, and also I'll look at the young adults. So some of these studies include the child mobility projects that Gina was involved in. We have the walkability study, and then the urban design, which focused on Kumasi. And then we also, of course, the child mobility we had from Sunyani, from Cape Coast, and then from other areas. So basically, that's where I'm going to glean some of these issues from. The trip to school generally is fraught with a lot of dangers for the child, whether the child is walking, is cycling, or probably joining a bus to school. In Ghana and in Cape Coast specifically, majority of children, actually for 70% of the children, still walk to school, sometimes over quite some distances. And for those who also use other vehicles, such as the trotros or the minibuses, which is known as Danfo in Nigeria, and then I think Matatus in Kenya and Uganda, they need to walk some distance to the station to board these vehicles. And of course, all these things come with their own challenges. When you look at the urban areas, in most cases, what you see is that the schools are located quite close to the road. And so when a child is embarked from a vehicle, then it's quite, when you're looking at personal safety, that trip to school from the bus terminal or the stations or the points of which they disembark from the cars are not quite far from their schools. The problem is reaching the bus stations from their homes, and that is where usually there are challenges. And also, depending on where the child lives, especially if the child lives in a peri-urban area, the distances to these bus terminals are longer. And then also we see that for children who live in slums, connectivity is quite a challenge, and therefore they have to weave their way through, because most of these buses cannot actually, buses or taxis do not travel into these areas. And I think that for now, the introduction of the tricycle into the system, popularly known in Ghana as Pragia, has helped, because that one terminates the journey closer to the child's place of residence than the taxis and then the trotros do. Some of the common challenges that children face, especially for those who would have to walk to the transport terminals, include verbal abuse, as has been shared by others. Then there's a physical assault, we have muggings, and then we have sexual assault and abuses. Lately, we are getting more and more of children being kidnapped in Ghana. It used not to be the case some time back, but now it is something that we are dealing with in Ghana. And what I would also say is that the journey to these transport terminals is often filled with anxiety. Anxiety because the child does not know what is coming next, especially when there is a vehicle that is approaching, that the child feels that persons in it could be people who could attack them, kidnap them, or do anything harmful to them. So every time the child is filled with a lot of anxiety and fear, and this actually serves as stressors for children's journey to school, something that children think about so much. And what makes the girl child so vulnerable in all of this? The fact that the person is a girl alone is enough to cement her fears and to make her vulnerable. Society sees the girl child as weak and one that can be easily picked on, and therefore it increases their vulnerability. And also the distance that they cover is a key thing that we need to deliberate about. When it is longer, their anxiety lasts throughout the journey. So then we have to accept the fact that the anxiety probably increases with the length of the journey that a child will have to go through. And this is something that we need to look at. As I said, the alternative now that we have in the system with the pragias or the tricycles that terminate their journeys closer to the place of abode of the child is something that is mitigating this effect. And then the time of the day has become a big problem. And this is because now children will have to go to school very early. In cities like Accra, where traffic congestion is a big problem, you would have children who will have to be on trotros to school as early as 5 a.m. when it is still dark. And this is quite challenging, especially if the child would have to walk a distance to get to the bus terminal. They are exposed to a lot of dangers because of the time of the day that they need to travel. We have incidents of children virtually taking breakfast in cars because there is no time to do that at home. If a child stays after 5:30 a.m. at home, she might end up getting to school late and will be punished for getting to school late. Another thing that we observed in our a project in Kumasi was the fact that post-COVID, there was a program that was initiated by the GES that was adopted by most of the schools. GES is Ghana Education Service, was adopted by most of the schools. And what they did was to help in to get the student to cover up for the time loss, especially for students or pupils in Basic 7. That is the JHS3 who were preparing to write the basic certificate examination. They had to be prepared. And so most of them were asked to come to school an hour before instruction hours. And that was quite serious for some of them. And they shared experiences of fear they had to go through from their place or from their residence to the bus stations where they could board vehicles to these places. So COVID itself brought out, post-COVID also brought out some issues or probably added to the anxiety that the school children had to go through. Then the neighborhood characteristics is very important, depending on where the child is living and where the journey leads to. Most cases when children are walking in isolated places with abandoned infrastructure and all that, it creates a lot of problems for them. In Accra, for instance, there was a time when young women were being raped on an abandoned footbridge, pedestrian footbridge. The footbridge, according to community members, were not placed in the right places, so most people avoided using it. Unfortunately, at night, some miscreants took it upon themselves to lay, to waylay vulnerable young ladies on that. So anybody who attempted to use that footbridge was raped. And these were people who were avoiding crossing the main motorway, which could actually lead to injuries or fatalities. So the point is that they could not use. Yes.
Thank you. I was going to say thank you very much, because you've given us a lot of different perspective with the girl child and so on. But in order, if we're going to fit Daniel in, I think we probably need to stop now. But we can probably come back to you in the general discussion. Is that okay? Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah. So Daniel, can you? I'm just aware that time is running by, and we have to finish at 25 past.
That's fine. I hope I don't get I don't use more than 5 minutes.
No, you're fine. Don't worry.
Thank you, Gina, for the invitation, and thank you to everyone for such insightful contributions so far. I will try not to repeat things that I believe that are common with the previous speakers. As with Clemens, my contribution is going to draw from the TISUM project. I shared the link on the chat, as well as another initiative that we have in Freetown at the moment, which I also shared the link on the chat, which is called the Walking Cities Lab. And basically, we conducted a few exercises with communities in different settlements in Freetown, different neighborhoods. Our rationale was simple, and it was selecting neighborhoods that were experiencing different levels of accessibility physically, meaning how far or how close you are from the center, and also how difficult it was, the infrastructure, the topography, your ability to move around the city on the one hand, and on the other, it was trying to get communities with different levels of income and access to a private vehicle, call it a motorcycle, a car, or at least more motorized transport than others. As we went along with this, what we realized is that the challenges for women are closely related. I mean, there is a commonality in the challenges for women to move in public space in general, which are underpinned in Freetown by local customs, by cultural values, as well as the configuration of the city itself. And perhaps we haven't talked so much about that in this discussion today. The risks that you have by moving in the city center of Freetown compared to the local mobility in different neighborhoods are significantly different. On the one hand, if you have, there is a neighborhood called Moyiba, which you can read more about in the two links that I sent in the chat. Is hilly, is informal. It used to be a quarry. The roads are not surfaced, are not paved. There is no sidewalk. There is no illumination at night. And most of the ways of accessing the different buildings in the community are self-provided. So the community has come together and built their own stairs, their own pathways, their own mini bridges for improvised drainage. And for women, it's very difficult, particularly because in this neighborhood, their mobility is very local. The main economic activity is whatever is left of the quarry, if not trading on the market. So they're always moving around with loads. They're always having to navigate a very difficult terrain. And that has an implicit set of risks depending on the time of the day, as well as the seasonality, which was another aspect that I wanted to raise. In Freetown, the difference of moving anywhere, not just in Moyiba, but anywhere in the city, between the rainy season and the dry season is gigantic. I mean, the level flooding in some of the streets, which become unusable. And when we start overlaying the different challenges that women have to face, as I was saying, many of them work in trading in the markets, so they have to wake up very early, to leave home very early, to go and get the goods and bring them back to where they're going to sell them, usually in the city center. Many are informal traders as well. And when the pavement where you're supposed to be selling your goods is flooded, then what are you going to do? So it's coming, of course, getting on and off the bus or the public transport, because there are other ways, as I think Regina and Wilma were suggesting. I mean, there is also a huge dependency on paratransit, on Okadas, on kekes, we call the tricycles in Freetown. And whenever we have that weather risk overlaying with having to move with heavy loads, which normally they don't get accepted in the bus when they come with heavy loads, combined with the fact that there are some traditional ways of moving around, that when you are jumping in between mudded part of the street is going to be even more difficult. I think all of those conditions of disadvantage intersect with each other, and we should sort of recognize that dynamic nature, that seasonality and that intersectionality that the risk for women's mobility have. There is something else that I wanted to highlight, and is the link with informality, which as the wonderful speakers before me have said, can bring both challenges and solutions, right? Because it is less regulated, the relationship between service provider and user is not really well enforced or controlled. That can be either positive or negative, because it can lead to abuse and impunity as much as it can. And here I'm drawing from a different case, where for example, the driver can help an elderly woman with their loads, can help them and be more patient, right? And something very positive about, especially paratransit, in those areas that have been historically been neglected by the provision of public transport locally from the city, is that the drivers tend to be part of the same community. So they know those women, that probably they have been raised by those groups of women that were there, and they are more accommodating for their needs when moving around. So informality can be very positive if leveraged in the right way. And this is something that we have found not just in Freetown, but in other cases in Africa. I'm not going to repeat, but just to highlight the issue as well of, when speaking about intersectionality, we need to talk about different forms of disadvantage. And of course, all women in a way are starting one step behind than most men in terms of moving around the city. But when this starts overlaying with age, with disability, with levels of education and access to technology, as well as income, this starts becoming more difficult. Because what we are finding, and you can see it in some of our reports for both Maputo and Freetown, the rise of app-based transport in the two cities is sort of coming quickly, especially with COVID, when both cities are starting imposing restrictions to the capacity and the occupation of public transport vehicles. So those who could afford it and didn't have a car started using on-demand taxis, using their apps. So for women that have that capacity, for women that are familiar with technology, for women that have the purchasing power, maybe the man of the household keeps using the car if there is only one car in the household. But when there is that disposable income, then they have a choice, right? Especially for moving at night, especially for leisure trips and sort of those non-obligatory trips, or even for making their life easier for care-related trips. So what happens there is something that perhaps is relevant to raise in this forum. And maybe just to close, I have a few questions for everyone probably. Is the first one is, should we look as well at foregone trips? Because my impression when listening at the risk and the challenges that women face, I mean, is if I were in their shoes, I would probably not leave home unless it's absolutely necessary. So how many desired trips are not being made because of the acute awareness of these challenges? Is a question that just came to me. And then the other is how perceptions of those risks evolve at different life stages, and what happened when women over women and generation after generation, they tell each other, well, be careful about this, be careful about those. Are you coming to the street overcautious? Is it a reality that's actually protecting you? I don't have an answer, but I think it's perhaps a relevant question to ask. And finally, and this is something that I take from Regina's intervention is, well, this has long-term implications for mental health and well-being. I mean, living with fear, it doesn't matter if it's abuse at home or it's abuse on the street, it's going to make your life more difficult down the line. And it is definitely, or I mean, not definitely, but probably going to have long-term implications for your mental health. Are we asking about that? Is there a way to do that? I haven't done it personally, but I think based on everything that I have listened to today, is something worth asking. And I will stop there. Thank you, Gina.
Thanks very much, Daniel. Well, that's rounded things off very well for us, I think, by raising these broader issues. And I think it would be good if now we can then move on to this. And somebody has raised a hand. I'm not quite sure how I think we invite.
Just ask them to just mention the name. They can unmute themselves and ask a question.
Amanda, can you unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you. I've got 2 points. I was trying to post them in the chat, but it hasn't worked. So I'm really glad I've got time to ask. It's a really interesting presentation. Thank you very much for it. It's interesting how similar issues are in different countries over the continent, and I think it speaks to a different problem as well. I just wanted to say Cape Town is also cutting accessible door-to-door transport for women with disabilities, and it's very sad. If you need a phone number to be able to talk to women with disabilities, please let me know. I can put my email in the box that I'll redo. But I actually also wanted to raise the issue of pedestrian bridges because women are in danger on them. And certainly here, engineers who are usually male, but not always, promote them as a pedestrian mobility solution. And one of the reasons is they can charge a substantial amount of money for building them, but they're the wrong intervention. And it's not just for women. It could be that it doesn't really speak to the pedestrian route and the urban form as a whole. But it then means that it's extremely difficult to implement pedestrian-focused policies. Another speaker spoke about the need to train pedestrians, but this case clearly illustrates that the bigger problem is caused by the lack of proper engineering solutions, in inverted commas, and the total disregard of the effect that these so-called solutions have on the lives of women and their futures. And that speaks to the points that the last speaker was making. And I also really think too, drivers are not taught about accommodating pedestrians and treating the pedestrians' needs above their own. Other speakers in other sessions have expressed this. And I really think it's of concern. I'd be very interested in a copy of your study because I think it's very useful to have this kind of data to support the kind of changes that we want to make in policy implementation. Thank you.
That's really helpful again. Thanks very much, Amanda. Does anybody else have things that they would like to share? If you want to put your hand up, we can probably... Kayemba. Kayemba, can you unmute? Kayemba? I think we're not getting... Bokeh has a hand up too.
Okay, can I... Is it okay now?
Okay, yeah. Kayemba.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm very, very excited with the presentations and the studies that have been made that are typical and cut across Africa. In many of the African countries, many of the African communities, these are some of the things that we are actually experiencing every day. particularly some of us that are concerned, some of us that are involved in this sector. One important issue that I want really to pose is the issues we're talking about are issues that are not within our domain. As practitioners, as experts, as civil society, they are not within our control. We can discuss about them. We can actually collect a lot of information in regard to the same. But how are we using this information to change? Because the people who have the mandate to change are not us. This is government. They have policies in place. They are responsible for resources, and they are the ones investing inappropriately and not experiencing democracy in the investment. When they do rehabilitation of a bad road, they will rehabilitate the other motor part and they will leave the pedestrian part. So what do we do? And I think I want to listen to some experiences on how this information has been used to influence change. I thank you.
Thank you. I think we've got a very one more quick intervention maybe from Bouquet if she unmutes, but we need to go to, we've only got 5 minutes for the final conclusion. So maybe Bouquet, a very quick comment.
Hi, I just wanted to share one very quick comment about engineering-oriented interventions. They're basic things like street lights that could make a real difference for pedestrians, especially moving around at night. I want to give a specific example of Ngong Road in Nairobi, which has been in development for over a decade. It's considered near finished now, but it's a high-speed area with illegal bus stops on both sides of the road. And it's in multiple lanes, and pedestrians are always dashing across and there's no there's no zebra crossings anywhere along the road. So especially at night, it's pitch black. The only light is from the headlights of the cars, and people are dashing back and forth across the road. It's extremely dangerous for both the pedestrians and the drivers because of the risk of swerving, either to avoid public transport coming off from the side, from the shoulder, or other vehicles entering, or just from avoiding pedestrians dashing across the road. So that's something to be considered. Where roads are in development, there is still not enough consideration for pedestrians in diversions and in the options that are provided for the people. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Bouquet. So Shadi, do you want to it's a pity we could go on, I think, for an hour probably talking, but we've literally got 5 minutes. Do you want to just try to give some final reflections from everything you've heard?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's been a really interesting presentations. I've got a couple of points, mainly relating to the project that we were talking about. So I'll just touch on them very briefly, and I'll try to keep to the 5 minutes. So my name is Shadi Ambrizini. I work for an NGO called Transaid, and we are Durham University's implementing partner on the Youth Engagement and Skills Acquisition Project in Tunis, Abuja, and Cape Town. And as an organization that focuses on road safety, mobility, and access, we have come into this project to mainly implement solutions to improve the experience of female commuters at the site of first pickup, at the site of first transport pickup point. So either as the walking journey begins or as it ends, as well as then on their journey on public transport itself. So speaking of the Youth Engagement and Skills Acquisition Project that was described before, the approach of the practical interventions that we're implementing involves, on the one hand, engaging with users of public transport, and on the other hand, piloting of skills training that target employees within the transport sector. And so we have seen what transpired from the research, so the potential for road traffic accidents and unsafe driving behavior that pose an incredible risk to commuters as they begin or end their journey on public transport. And this is linked to deteriorating transport infrastructure and disappearing footpaths, for example, in many cities. And while our interventions don't directly tackle these issues pertaining to transport infrastructure, we have extensive experience in targeting unsafe driving behavior through professional driver training, for example. By improving driving standards on the roads, we aim to reduce the risk of injury or worse by non-motorized transport users. And this targets both the formal and informal transport provision. And we have experience in delivering HEV, PSV, as well as motorcycle training. Another aspect that heavily transpired from the research is the vulnerability of commuters to sexual harassment and gender-based violence, as we have seen. And one of the main tactics that is put in place by commuters to improve their walking journey is, for example, planned group travel. So we see the use of mobile technologies by commuters themselves that can, of course, make a real difference in planning the journeys where this is available and accessible. But we know that this doesn't always work, especially where public transport provision is inconsistent and is driven by fluctuating customer demand. And so without effective and user-centric public transport provision, this can still leave people really, really vulnerable in their journeys. And so one of the ways on this project in which we're aiming in which we're addressing this is through targeted transport management systems training. With a view that, among other things, is aimed at improving the capability of public transport providers to effectively plan for their transport provision. And so this training targets mainly female employees in the transport sector with a view to enhancing their opportunities for career progression and thus amplifying their voices in decision-making that is more gender sensitive and gender responsive. Another aspect that really did transpire from the research is that commuters' voices are often excluded from the planning of transport provision. And so one way in which we seek to include these voices is by building relationships between female commuters and transport associations, for example, and their drivers. And we're doing so via participatory workshops where we prompt discussions geared at raising awareness on the vulnerabilities of commuters, and then ultimately gathering key information to develop and influence the adoption of things like codes of conduct, customer service charters for the adoption by public transport providers, so that, again, we can see changes implemented that are more gender responsive and gender sensitive, so that we can reduce the risk of instances of gender-based violence occurring. We also do this while we engage with public transport providers, for example, in the review of existing policy documents and charters, and advocate for the inclusion of recommendations and solutions that have directly transpired from our engagement with the public transport users so that we can respond directly to their needs. Yeah, as a final reflection, I'm sorry, I'm really speeding through, but this is just to tell us that we are really in dire need of coordinated efforts that take into account the everyday vulnerabilities of non-motorized transport users and that work to ameliorate their experiences on the road through really broad action for whole transport system change. And that include making efforts to engage with government to promote policy development and its effective implementation, advocacy, activism, and community mobilization to amplify the voices of the most vulnerable road users, capacity building and skills training with the transport sector to improve the way they manage their fleets and the way that they plan for their transport so that it responds to the needs of the road use of the commuters. Innovative communication strategies that link transport providers with their users, and I could go on and on. But yeah, we're really excited for this project to be a part of this project, and as we continue the implementation, we really look forward to sharing the outcomes from our activities. Yeah, that's me done. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you very much, Shadi. I think that it's so frustrating that I think everybody's got so much more they want to say. I think all we can do to conclude is thank ANWAC again for giving us this space and hope that we can sort of take this forward with many of you. I mean, we're certainly going to take some of this back to our country consultative groups in the 3 cities, but it would be good to try to push forward all over, wherever we can, with these debates. I don't know if anybody else wants to finish with any final, or if we're out of time, Juliet.
We are really out of time. We have the other session starting in like 3 minutes. So probably what you can do is also share any other findings that you have with on the project, and I can upload in the Google Drive to share with everyone after the session.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you everybody who's joined in and participated. I'm sorry that those who didn't get to participate, there wasn't time, but thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
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 Thank you. Bye-bye.